This has now had about a day and a half to cure on its own, so coming in here and touching the corners gently, it's not really wet at all anymore. Even the areas that were more heavily covered, such as behind these side trim pieces, that's all dried up. So that is good. You can still see the stripe on the back a little bit if you get the right angle, same with the one on the walls, but you really have to be looking for it and you got to have the light coming from a certain angle, otherwise you're not really going to see it. So for my purposes, because this is going to be hidden by other things, it's going to be okay. So that said, I'm going to call the paint good in here. And now that everything is dry, what we're going to do is fit these little crossboards that we have cut out. I'm going to put the camera down for this, but here's the basic premise of what we're doing is we're taking the boards and these are going to go in against this wall. So we want a tight fit, but we don't want it so tight that as we slide it in like that, it marks up that back wall. So I know I cut them about an 1/8 inch long anyhow because I knew we were going to shim them down, and it's better to have them too long to start than too short. But let's see if I can do this without ripping the mic out. So to fit this in, this is not going to fit behind this trim board as we initially thought. So because the trim board is going to be in the way, we're swinging it the other direction. So for most boards, most closets are going to be about, this is a 2.5, not quite 3 foot span. It's I think 32 inches. For something that's about that size of a run, every inch or so that you're out from the corner, it's going to come out to about 1/8 of an inch that you want to shave off of the end of the board. This is just going to be a lot of repeating of going down to the saw, trimming off a very small section at the end, then coming back and refitting it, and then just rinse and repeating that. Before you start shimming all of them, know which one is going on which side and which one is going to be the top and bottom for each side. Again, the fitment could be a little bit different. It's not going to be a huge amount, but it could be, you know, 1/8 of an inch off from one end to the other. So having it assigned beforehand, getting that top and bottom cut specifically for those locations will give you a better finish at the end. One other thing I forgot to state is on top of assigning which one is going which side and top or bottom in the closet, you also want to figure out right off the bat which side is facing out. And by out, I mean towards where you're going to be able to see it and not up against the wall. A lot of these ones with the chipped edges, you want to have that as your back side because no one's ever going to crawl up and under to look at that back edge. Or if it's going to be the high piece, you want that on the high side because no one's ever going to come up on a ladder to look down on it. All the markings you want to do for your cutting, you want to do on the side that's going to be against the wall. That way there's no chance of any pencil marks or anything showing through in the final product. So because we know this big chip is here, this side has to be against the wall. And what we're going to do right now is just do this. And that way we can tell really quick and easily which side we're not putting out. So this isn't something you absolutely need to do. This is just a much quicker visual indicator, and it's something that you're never going to see that mark again once it's up against the wall, so you shouldn't feel too bad about marking up this surface. Now with that said, I'm going to go through and I'm going to mark up all of the ones I have so I know which side I want facing out. Then on top of that, I'm also going to write on this side where in the closet it goes of those 4 positions. So I'm going to go do that for all 4 boards. I'm not going to show the full test fitting. I might show 1 or 2 repetitions, but I'm not going to show the full cutting process because that's just going to be too time consuming. I will, however, show how all 4 at the end fit. So that way you have an idea for how much gap is acceptable. I'll say acceptable, but it's really going to depend on how close of a finish fit that you want yourself. If you want to be more or less picky, it is entirely up to you. Very last thing I forgot to mention on camera is that when you're selecting where you're going to put your shelf height-wise, all you really need to consider is what you're hanging and how high up you can comfortably reach. So it's going to just be a guess and check game. What I pretty much did is I walked in and I said, okay, I can reach about here, and then measured off the ceiling, and I said that's where the top of my bar is. And based on the pole sockets that I've got, that is these sockets here that hold up the actual clothes rail, basically I said I know how big the pole is, I know where the center of this is, and I know where I want to position this on those cross rails. So for me, effectively, because I can reach up comfortably, the top of this railing is going to be 9 inches down from the ceiling in there, and then the other railing is going to be 48 inches down. And as a result, I'm putting the top edge of that cross rail about 7 to 8 inches down. So depending on if you're hanging things that are shorter or longer, or if you can reach a different height comfortably, or if you're using a step ladder or whatever, you might have to adjust those accordingly. Now one thing I also want to note is because I'm going to be positioning this fairly high, I'm only going to have about a 6-inch gap at the top if I ever want to put a top shelf. However, I had a closet like that previously and I never really used that shelf, so I don't really need one at this point, but I will have the option to add one in later if I ever decide I want to go back. Additionally, the lower rail is going to be about this height, so even my longest shirts, I'm not going to really have less than 6 inches of space underneath, so I should have ample storage space at the bottom. All right, with all that said, now I'm actually going to get everything shimmed and then I'll continue the video. So I took about an 1/8 inch off of this board, and that one is still a little bit too long. It's still sticking out about 1.5 to 2 inches on the far corner. One thing you want to note is that while you want the fit to be tight so that the board could in theory stay there unsupported, you don't want it so tight that you rip up the wall. That's a big mistake a lot of people make with these, is they force them into place and then they scuff up the entire wall behind it. Then they got to go back and repaint the wall with the board still attached on the wall. A snug fit is good, but do not force it. This board and the other boards need just a little bit of trimming, so I'm going to show how to take off just a hair with the miter saw, and then I'll resume after all 4 of them are cut and they're the correct length. This is the best way I know how to trim just a very small amount using a miter saw. With the piece of wood lined up, you put your blade down and you slide the piece of wood over into the side of the blade. You want a little bit of pressure on it, just light to medium pressure. That way when you lift the saw up and then you put it back down, you barely catch the lip of the teeth on the actual piece of wood. One thing I do want to note is you don't want to slam it into the side of the saw blade, or over time you could potentially either bend the blade a little bit or just have this come a little off kilt and have a slight angle to when you're cutting. So I'm going to put on my hearing protection, then we're going to actually make this cut. I'm going to take this, press it up against. The harder you press, the more you're going to take off. And you can see I'm kind of biting in about a 1/16 of an inch right now. So I just went back and measured this, and it's just under a 1/16 inch of material that we removed. I'm gonna go test fit this one piece real quick. This one was off by about the same amount all the other pieces were as well. So I'm gonna use this as a judgment piece to see whether or not I need to remove the same amount of material from all the other pieces, or if I have to remove more from this and additionally make additional passes on the other material as well before trying to fit it all. Now the 4 boards are in. I did have a little more off of this one than I wish I took off. That was because I used the standard amount that I shaved from the other board that I used as a sample. So you can see when it's perfectly level, there's a little bit of a hair gap there. It's not super critical, and I'm going to have some shelving potentially over this or around it, but even if I didn't, it's hidden behind this trim board, so I'm not necessarily going to see that, so it's not bad for fitting. These ones over here are actually pretty good. This one is, you can see it's just a hair out. I can't really force it into that corner without potentially causing damage or ripping up some paint. This one's going to get just a small sliver removed, and this one up here is actually very good. This is snug and very well fit. However, it's also apparent that, like I said, the wall isn't really perfectly straight. Never assume your wall is. I could remove half a hair from this one as well, but I'm a little hesitant to do so. The only real issue is this one here. It does need a hair trimmed off, but it also has that stupid nail thing that was sticking out in the corner on the back, so I have to notch a spot in the back side of this board so it can slide over. I'm going to measure that out. I'll probably do that with a chisel or a rasp, but other than that, these are in really good shape. So what I'm going to do now is get the holes pre-drilled for where the stud locations are going to be. Then that way I can get them stained. I'm going to do a separate video on staining. I'll put a link to that in the description below. This video will resume after all that staining is completed.